Hey everyone, how you guys doing today? So continuing on from yesterday, we're just gonna start reading on the Graph API, which, by the way, I just read like this first line and just summarizing that. Essentially, it's how you interact with all of Meta's APIs, like all of their APIs essentially operate in a graph framework. And there was a question I wanted to ask last time that I'm gonna ask now. Difference between Graph API and GraphQL, because like what it was describing sounded very similar, although both involve the idea of a graph in data representation. A graph API refers to an API designed to interact with data structured as a graph, typically in a graph database. These APIs allow developers to access and manipulate vertices, nodes, and edges relationships within a graph database. Examples include Microsoft Graph API, which provides access to 365, blah, blah, blah. GraphQL is a query language for APIs and a runtime for fulfilling those queries with existing data. It allows clients to request exactly the data they need, preventing overfetching or underfetching. GraphQL defines a schema that describes available data and its types, enabling clients to construct precise queries. While it can be used with various data sources, including relational databases and NoSQL databases or even other APIs, it does not inherently require a graph database. Fair, that made sense. The graph refers to the conceptual graph of data that clients can traverse and query regardless of the underlying data storage mechanism. Also understood. Okay, this makes sense. So Graph API is an API for interacting with inherently a graph databases, while GraphQL is a query language that you can use for any API regardless of the backend data store. Um, the confusing thing to me is then doesn't it mean that you can almost always use GraphQL as a graph API? I don't know. I actually do not know. Can I use GraphQL to interact with Meta Graph API? It's primarily a RESTful API. It is possible, though it's not a native direct integration offered by Meta in the same way they offer for internal mobile applications. Okay. I'm not gonna. It's essentially primarily RESTful, so we'll just stick with that. Okay, if you're unfamiliar with the Graph API, we recommend that you start with these documents. Overview, learn how the Graph API is structured and how it works, get started. Explore the endpoints and run your first request, batch requests, debug requests, handle errors, field expansion, learn how to limit the number of objects returned in a request, and perform nested requests, secure requests, learn how to make secure requests to the Graph API, resumable uploads API, learn how to upload files to the Graph API. Okay, overview. Graph API, primary way to get data into and out of the Facebook platform. It's an HTTP-based API that apps can use to programmatically query data, post new stories, manage ads, upload photos, and perform a wide variety of other tasks. Graph API is named after the idea of a social graph, a representation of the information on Facebook. It's composed of nodes, edges, and fields. Typically, you use nodes to get data about a specific object, use edges to get collections of objects on a single object, and use fields to get data about a single object or each object in a collection. Throughout our documentation, we may refer to both a node and an edge as an endpoint. For example, send a GET request to the user endpoint. So it's essentially what we discussed. It's a end series of endpoints, I'm presuming, or maybe flexible connection of endpoints that allows you to traverse Facebook's graph database, I guess. I'm not 100% sure if that's an accurate statement, but it sounds about right for now. HTTP, all data transfers conform to HTTP 1.1 and all endpoints require HTTPS. Because the Graph API is HTTP based, it works with any language that has an HTTP library such as curl and URLlib. This means you can use the Graph API directly in your browser. For example, requesting this URL in your browser is equivalent to performing this curl request. I've also enabled the include subdomains HSTS directive on Facebook.com, but this should not adversely affect your Graph API calls. Okay, I don't know what is HSTS. I'm just gonna search with Google. Sending a special from the server to the browser called strict transport security. This header includes a max age directive that specifies the length of time in seconds. HTTP strict transport security. Okay. We have also enabled the include subdomains HSTS directive on include subdomains HSTS. What is this? Okay, the Mozilla Dev Docs. Okay. If this directive is specified, the HSTS policy applies to all subdomains of the host domain as well. Okay. Okay, so basically everything will always be HSTS. That's essentially what it means. So them enabling the include subdomains HSTS directive on Facebook.com, but this should not adversely affect your Graph API calls. So basically any domain that's a subdomain of Facebook.com, which I'm presuming is all of them. I don't know if WhatsApp also falls under that or if they are maintained separately. I don't know. Host URL, almost all requests are passed to graph.facebook.com, host URL. The single exception is video uploads which use graphvideo.facebook.com. Okay. Access tokens. Access tokens allow your app to access the Graph API. Almost all Graph API endpoints require an access token of some kind. So each time you access an endpoint, your request may require one. Okay, so basically all of them require an access token. Fair enough. They typically perform two functions: allow your app to access a user's information without requiring the user's password. For example, your app needs a user's email to perform a function. If the user agrees to allow your app to retrieve their email address from Facebook, the user will not need to enter their Facebook password for your app to get their email address. They allow us to identify your app, the user who is using your app, and the type of data the user has permitted your app to access. So it's essentially access tokens are a way to give fine-grained control. A lot of people, and in fact, that's kind of what I'm also building with WhatsApp, is like I'm going to allow other people to do things with this. And so in that case, each of these different people need to give me access, right? And I'm assuming that would be tied into OAuth 2. Somehow you'd get an access token through OAuth 2, and that access token inherently has the details on, or probably is looked up once you send the access token on what the user has actually given access to. Nodes. Access token documentation, learn more. Okay, I'm gonna open that up, but I'm gonna stick on this because access tokens are not that difficult. Nodes. A node is an individual object with a unique ID. For example, there are many user node objects, each with a unique ID representing a person on Facebook pages, groups, posts and photos and comments are just some of the nodes of the Facebook social graph. Okay. Pages, groups, posts, photos, and comments. Okay, so these are each nodes. So nodes and edges. Remember, nodes are in a graph database. Quick for people listening. Essentially, you have nodes and edges where your node is an entity, any entity. It could be, you can have like node templates, like this is a user entity or this is a that entity, but each node is its own entity. And because of the template or the type of that node, it can have certain attributes, and then those attributes have relations, right? So you can have a few things on the node, but the key is to connect information from one node to the next via a relation, right? So let's see if I can, I don't know what, that the graph TBC customer resides at location, order ships to location, order purchased by customer, customer purchased product, customer, order notifies supplier, order purchased particular product, supplier delivers products. So this is an example of the nodes and the edges. So that's essentially how it works. So a node is an entity. So going back to the graph database, graph API, nodes, there you go. An individual is an object. A node is an individual object with a unique ID. For example, there are many user node objects, each with a unique ID representing a person on Facebook, pages, groups, blah, blah, blah. The following curl example represents a call to the user node. Okay. The request would return the following data by default formatted using JSON. Okay. Node metadata. You can get a list of all fields, including the field name, description, and data type of a node object, such as user, page, or photo. You can get a list of all fields, including the field name, description, and data type of a node object, such as user, page, or photo. Okay. Send a GET request for an object ID and include the metadata equals 1 parameter. So this would be a query parameter, I believe, right? That's what these are, the ones after the question. So metadata equals 1. Resulting JSON response will include the metadata property that lists all the supported fields for the given node. Name, metadata, fields, name, ID, description. Unique to the app and cannot be used by other apps. Type, numeric string, name, age range. The age segment for this person expressed as a minimum. Okay, so essentially the document, you can get the documentation for each type by just passing metadata equals 1 and seeing everything that you get. The /me node is a special endpoint that translates to the object ID of the person or page whose access tokens is currently being used to make the API calls. If you had a user access token, you could retrieve a user's name and ID by using blah. Okay, edges. An edge is a connection between two nodes. For example, a user node can have photos connected to it, and a photo node can have comments connected to it. The following curl example will return a list of photos a person has published to Facebook. So nodes and edges are basically different endpoints. So we go to this endpoint, give it the access token. Can have photos connected, and a photo node can have. The following curl example will return a list of photos a person has published to Facebook. So given this user ID, photos, blah, blah. And you get this data. Fields. Fields are node properties. When you query a node or an edge, it returns a set of fields by default. As the examples above show, however, you can specify which fields you want returned by using the fields parameter and listing each field. This overrides the defaults and returns only the fields you specify and the ID of the object, which is always returned. The following curl requests includes the fields parameter and the user's name, email, and profile picture. Fields are node properties when you query. I'm sorry, my brain is trying to drift a little bit. I got like a few other things on my head. Actually, a little hungry also. So anyways, we talked about nodes, we talked about edges, fields. When you query a node or an edge, it returns a set of fields by default, as the examples above show. However, you can specify which fields you want returned by using the fields parameter and listing each field. This overrides the defaults and returns only the fields you specify, and the ID of the object, which is always returned. Is this accurate? When you query a node or an edge, as the examples above show, you can specify which fields you want to return by using the fields parameter. So this would need a little bit of testing in the API. So it is a query parameter, but then it looks like it's passed in as a string instead of being passed in repeatedly. I don't know. Because I know, like, if you set up in FastAPI a list of query parameters, where is it? Query parameter models, query parameters, and string validations. I think this might have the list of queries thingy. Yeah, here you go. Annotated list of string. See, that's when you pass in Q again and again. So I'm not sure if you can pass in the fields more than once, because that would be a nice way to define that. But then again, this is FastAPI is actually for having your own API, so it doesn't really matter, because the framework we'd have to build to hit up WhatsApp would be different, though it should be integrated with our own API, because we'd have a webhook. I'm not exactly sure how can a webhook hit a webhook hit call an API. Yeah, that's actually what I wanted to see. Essentially everything sent from one application to a specific URL, the webhook endpoint, in another application when a particular event occurs. Yeah. Contain data related to the event. So yeah, this is what I essentially need to do, is build an endpoint for the WhatsApp webhook to hit up, and then do things from there. Yeah, and how will I do that? Will I just be monolithic about it? I think I'll probably just do, just kind of make it basically functional, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, going back, register as a meta developer. I know for this I need to have a Facebook account, which I'm not very happy about, but whatever. What is this? Oh, this is the WhatsApp Cloud API. I'm going to look up, keep reading the Graph API page. Oh, okay. I'm a little hungry and tired. I'm thinking about a few other things in my life, so I'm just gonna wrap up here. But I think one thing this reminded me of of something that I'm actually very I thought of doing a few days ago, but then I'm glad I didn't. So it's weird. You guys might have noticed by now. I use let's hope there's nothing. So, anyways, I use Trello, which is like a board. I don't want to show it to you because I think there's a few more personal things that I don't want to showcase right now. And I need to be more careful with that because I feel like stuff has leaked slowly in like things like having this open here. Nothing important here, but still. And so what I'm looking for. Having in that task board, I was thinking about. I'm going to describe what I was trying to do, why I didn't do it, and describe the generalization of it that I want to express to whoever is watching this. Essentially, in my Trello, I was going to set up a automated task that would refresh every day and automatically put into my doing list. So basically, kind of make it something to do every day. So, for example, for recording these video, I have a record video for channel, and then I have a FastAPI building learning, which I initially they were the same task, but then I split them up because sometimes I'm recording a different thing and I kind of want to do a different thing, or I just wanted to have like a chill day in the learning and I wanted to read a little bit by myself without like recording a video. I usually they're both aligned, so I close them both at the same time. But yeah. And so I was gonna add a automated task there to have a code commit every day. I'm gonna move this over here to have a code commit every day. And what I realized was why I didn't do it was because I was like, okay, I spent a bunch of time reading the Fast API docs before I got into coding it, which it's not. I do recommend like learn by doing, but also it's like a healthy balance. You need to also like go out and read stuff. Like just do it. That mentality doesn't work always. And there's a balance between the two that needs to be struck. And I'm learning that myself as well. And you'll feel it yourself. And when you feel that, that's when you need to switch. And the reason I didn't do it is like if I hit a position again where I am actually doing the task that matters, which is like the building and the learning part of putting this all together, but I'm not actually writing code, and then like I'm just gonna have a task that I'm just gonna ignore every day and cancel every day and blah blah blah. And it was a small thing regarding Trello, but for me it's like I try to be not perfect, but as close to perfect as possible, wherein like I try to hope for 80% of the stuff in my doing list to be done. And if it's not, I very specifically either actively can make sure to cancel it before the end of the day, move it over actively, and I don't allow it to be moved over to the next day more than a few times before I'm like, no, this actually needs to be addressed. Or like rescheduled like expressively. And then if I'm actually expressively rescheduling it for a few weeks from now, I'll move it to the appropriate list to be brought into my doing on its own later on. And the generalization of this whole story, because maybe I'm not describing it very well, is essentially don't try to create habits that may inadvertently limit what you do, right? And the way to do that is to think about what you're trying to do, right? Like For example, if in the same example, let's say someone, you, whoever's watching, wants to get super in shape, right? Or more, and they're like, I have to work out these many hours every day, right? That that's a goal that is not sustainable to begin with. Why? Because it's an external goal. Like, why do you want to get like all bulky and like have massive muscles, or if you're a chick, how become super svelte or whatever, right? That's for sure. Okay, so but the core of it is, okay, you want to be healthy. Okay, then you don't need to be exercising 2 hours a day. You need to eat a little bit better and make sure you do like a 10-minute walk every day, right? So that should be the thing you do every day, right? And that's a very simple thing, but thinking that through. So having goals that are inherently driven from within you for some purpose, right? Or as close to that on the spectrum, because there's a spectrum of things, right? Like there's, oh, I want to get in shape for people to look at me. Okay, ugh. Oh, that's completely externally motivated. I want to get in shape so that I am really physically strong because I'm gonna be a dad soon and my body can't ache as much. Okay, that is internally motivated, but that's also somewhat externally motivated. I want to get in shape because I want to have a healthy and long life. Okay, that also technically, in a way, that's mm, still somewhat extrinsically motivated in the sense that you are thinking about doing it for having a long life. And then there's I want to work out because I like working out, right? To as close to this over this is the best, is the better choice of goal. Um, and that's extremely important, I think, to think through whether the goal itself is appropriate, and then once you have that appropriate goal, think about the tasks that flow from that, to make sure to think about the actual goal and not the side objective that is helping you get there, right? For example, like with me with this project, I do have a larger goal of setting up my own venture, and there's multiple smaller goals in that process, like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, right? And code and learning how to code and learning how to write code and doing it super well is like an important aspect of that, but the code itself is kind of a means to an end. So if I just force myself to do bullshit commits every day, then I'm easily gonna fall to that lowest common denominator eventually, and just start like putting out bullshit commits that are just meaningless doc strings or whatever. Exactly the kind of stuff several videos ago that I actually ignored in my pipe project.toml. I ignored D100 to D107 warnings because I didn't want my code base to be polluted with just bullshit doc strings to shut up a warning, right? I didn't want that. And so it's something that I am going to, and that's something I want to continue living on with. And you can see that this is much more complex for me with where I'm at with how I'm thinking about this thing. Because, like, you could say that, oh, you're starting a venture is a very extrinsically motivated, but it's actually not for me because it's tied to a very personal thing. And okay, that personal thing you can also argue is extrinsically motivated, true, but that's also tied to a more deeper internal thing that I want, right? And so it's not like your goals can't be extrinsically motivated. It's just that they have to be intrinsically motivated. And each goal can be motivated in multiple ways. And as long as there is a significant amount of intrinsic motivation to a goal, um, you should focus on creating tasks that actually service the core essence of the goal and not just like the byproducts of the things you need to do for the goal, right? Uh, like same thing with going back to the code commit. Another intrinsic thing for me is like coding is fun. It's really fun and interesting to me. That's why I'm like doing this in this way, right? Like quote unquote for my venture to work. I could have tried to raise money and just hire someone or convince other techie people to do it, right? and just go co-founder hunting or whatever. But I very specifically chose not to do that because it's more fun for me. And then there's other levels of it, of being able to actually be intrinsically in touch with the tech stuff rather than get divorced with how the actual work occurs and then make ridiculous and stupid decisions later on down the road, right? So there's multiple layers to it, right? The example I gave of like the walking and getting in shape is a very simple option. So to summarize all of that, make sure your goals, and they can be extrinsically motivated. Like each goal can have like an extrinsic layer of the motivation and like a middle layer and then a more intrinsic layer and a more intrinsic layer. Like there can be multiple layers, but every goal that you have or are interested in achieving in your life should have some level of intrinsic motivation. uh, and the more the better. Like I would say 50% or more if you can quantify such a thing, but it's hard to quantify the thing because maybe there is an external motivation. There's several external motivations, and there's only one intrinsic motivation, but that motivation is so big that it doesn't matter, right? Um, so that's very hard to quantify, but have your goals be intrinsically motivated, and be when thinking about the discrete steps to execute on that goal, make sure to actually keep the goal in mind, right? And it's not going to be perfect. Like, for example, with this automation idea, I might have actually just gone through and done it in a tired moment, as like, because sometimes we do work and we convince ourselves to like stay productive. And that's also helpful in a way because it keeps the ball rolling and keeps you thinking for the next day. Like with the logging code that I wrote that was trashy and that I just tossed, completely. Um, so so it doesn't need to be perfect, right? You can't like don't over obsess on it. But, you know, if you are true to that, you'll just eventually come back to that and be like, oh, okay, this is trash. I'm not gonna do this. Or like this served me a purpose at that time, but it doesn't serve me a purpose now. Or oh, this is trash, but I'm gonna do it anyways because it teaches me this other thing, and it's kind of associated with this other thing, and then I'll get rid of it later. That's okay. That part is okay. But be more intrinsically motivated than extrinsically motivated, and make sure that the tasks, or try your best to align the discrete steps you take to achieving that goal be actually aligned with the goal itself and not some other offshoot, right? But also, messy action in a direction that isn't exactly aligned is better than no action. So don't overthink this stuff. But it is important to allow it, have it be kicking in the back of your head. Um, Also, another thing, I keep talking about goals, goals, goals. I think one of the things that someone hearing this might think about is like, oh, there should be one goal, and that's somewhat true. It's like prioritization is important, um, but it's coming kind of being a little bit Buddhist about it, but it's less about eliminating other goals and more realizing there is only one goal, right? Or there's only one thing to do. Um, and that's super weird thing to say, but to crystallize that, like for example, all of these things that I've described regarding my goals, it's tied to this sense of what's up, babe? Can I just want to finish this line and then I'm ending this video and then we can go. And my wife is dancing in the background. You guys can't hear that, see that, and I will never ever show you, and I will rip out your eyes if you guys do ever see that. But anyways, to finish my sentence, all this conception that, and you can come here and listen to this if you want, babe, because I'm talking mild philosophy, is it's not about eliminating your other goals and prioritizing through elimination, but it's realizing that they're all kind of connected to the thing you really want to do, right? And so what happens is automatically your mind will start restructuring once you see, and this is something, I mean, you can cultivate by meditating and things like that, but it'll just hit one day, really, to see how all the pieces fit together for you. And when you do all of these disparate goals that you can't your struggle to get motivation towards doing things, they kind of all fall in place, right? Like, oh, okay, so first I need to do this one, and then this one requires this one, so I'll have to get this good or this far ahead in this one, and then I have to come back in here and do this one to at least this point before I can continue this to here. And like your goals kind of line up in the timeline of your life, right? Because it's actually servicing the bigger thing of who you really want to be. Yeah, I think that's probably enough philosophy for now. But that was important, and it's probably difficult for you guys, for whoever's watching this, to follow along, because it was even difficult for me to formulate and externalize. Um, but yeah, I do believe in the truth of these statements. Anyways, I think we're just gonna end the video there. Take care, everyone. Have a good one. Bye bye.